One, and we are recording back in the saddle for yet another episode. Mr. Michael Vecchione, who has been on here a million times, will be on here a million more. He has some books. It's finally 2022. So your book will be out this spring, I believe, or early
Yes, it
summer.
will. Spring, the way it looks right now. Homicide is my business, and hopefully, we're going to have a few podcasts to talk about the book when it comes out. It's a bunch of good stories in there.
Hell yeah! And your other
about-
books, Friends of the Family, Crooked Brooklyn, Behind the Murder Curtain. We've gone over all of those. I believe one of them is on Audible too, and then all of them are on Kindle. I'll put those in the description as always, as well as the short stories. And but for all the new listeners because actually, even though I always say for all the new listeners, I did quadruple my subscriber base over Christmas break. So thank you for all of the new listeners. Mr. Vecchione, please introduce yourself and tell them a little about yourself.
Well, you just heard my name. I was the chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn DA's office from 2001, right before 9/11, until I retired in 2013, when my boss, the district attorney, lost an election. So the new DA was not interested in keeping, people around, particularly someone like me. I had been there for a lot of years, and I knew where all of the bones and bodies were buried. So there was no way I was staying. And I retired before he could fire me because I knew it was coming. So, but those, I guess, almost 13 years in the rackets division were terrific years. I did a lot of good work there, if I do say so myself. And now that I see in the news, the crooked politicians and some crooked judges and people who were on to take. I think that the work that I did back in those years was the kind of precursor to this stuff. I put away 3 Supreme Court judges, a couple of very, very powerful politicians in New York. And that was in between the mobsters and other things that I did, and all of it is outlined. I'll give myself an unabashed plug in Crooked Brooklyn. So and for your listeners, they know that we have covered a lot of the stories in Crooked Brooklyn, and the one we're going to talk about today I didn't include because it actually happened before I was chief of rackets. I was chief of the Homicide Bureau before I went over to rackets. So this was a case that came to me when I was chief of homicide. So and it was a case that kind of interested me as soon as the detectives came in and asked me about taking it. So
for something like today's before that, I was going to say, for everyone that maybe gets tired of episodes of me talking to doctors and trying to be an optimist about the outcome of the world, or talking about the importance of patriotism and hard work, if you ever want to just tune in for rape and murder, extortion, and moving drugs and human trafficking, you come on down to the Mike Vecchione corner, because that's what this is for. We get rid of the sunshine and we go into, all right, so her body was burned and thrown on the corner of a bridge, and which is one of the stories we did. But seriously, that's why, in a messed up way, I enjoy talking to you, is because I get pulled down from my ethereal. I'm like, everything has a silver lining, and you talk about, truly like the devil in Brooklyn, and it's like, it's very real. And so with today's, just how often is a cold case reopened and kind of successful? Was this a mixture of luck? Was it a mixture of the new guy coming in and being inspired by the woman or the mother? How often is a cold? I guess we'll get to that later on.
To answer those questions, the answer is yes to all of them. In this case, it was a mixture of a mother who could not let the murder of her son go uninvestigated to the fullest. It was a mix, and adding to that mix were the new detectives who were assigned by the new police commissioner, who attended a meeting with the new mayor of New York City and opened it up to the citizens of an area of Brooklyn called Bay Ridge to kind of tell them about things that bother them and what they wanted addressed. The new mayor was David Dinkins, and the new police commissioner was a guy named Ray Kelly, who you might have, your listeners might know if they are certainly people who follow law enforcement and are in New York City. He was one of the best police commissioners we ever had. And when Dinkins became mayor, he brought Kelly to just about every precinct in the city to hear out the public's problems, the public's gripes, things the public wanted the police department to look at. And when they got to Bay Ridge, they encountered Mrs. Checkett, who is the mother of the person who was murdered in this case. And I have to tell you, first of all, I think I need to describe a little bit about what Bay Ridge is. Bay Ridge is a sort of like a bedroom community in a big city. It's near the Verrazano Bridge, which is the bridge between Brooklyn and Staten Island. It's not far from the water, and it is a neighborhood of both apartment buildings and private homes. It also has a terrific nightlife area to it, with restaurants and bars, and it's mostly inhabited by cops, firemen, and other public servants. So that's where this incident occurred.
What does bedroom community mean?
Well, that it's not like the middle of Manhattan. It's a place where you work as a cop and then you go home to bed in your home in Bay Ridge, or you work in a big office building on Wall Street, and then when the day is over, you go home to this nice, quiet, mostly tree-lined neighborhood. So
Wolf of Wall Street, right? The girl he has the affair with, right? The Duchess of, is that right? The Duchess of Bay Ridge. Yeah, the Duchess.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So Chester, his real name, everybody called him Chet. Chet Checkett was, I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll get back to his mom. So Chet Checkett was basically the prototypical all-American boy in Bay Ridge. He went to grammar school there. He went to high school there. He went to college even in Brooklyn. I think he went to Brooklyn College. And he was a star football player at his high school. And he was the kind of guy who everybody loved, particularly the moms who were friends of Mrs. Checkett. They loved Chet. He was the guy who was always friendly to them, who would volunteer his time to go to the store for them. He was just, if there is such a person, the typical, prototypical, all-American boy, so to speak, who was perfect, except that he wasn't perfect. Chet Checkett was a drug dealer. When he got out of college, he became a stockbroker and began his career on Wall Street. And when I said before about the people who work in the big buildings in Manhattan, he was one of those guys. He worked on Wall Street, and every night he went home to Bay Ridge to his family and friends. But he was a drug dealer. He sold cocaine, he sold heroin, and he was selling it to not only his Wall Street cronies, because that was the time that that Wall Street was in. You talk about Wolf of Wall Street. This was the 80s, and it was in the middle of that. Exactly correct. So he sold not only to all of the people in his sphere of influence, the people he connected with on Wall Street, but when he came back home, he was selling to all of the people he knew in his neighborhood. Bay Ridge has tons of bars and clubs, and he was active in all of them, and he was active not only in drinking and having fun, but he was also active in that he was selling to people in these clubs. The problem was Chet was selling in a territory in Bay Ridge that belonged, quote unquote, to two soldiers of the Gambino crime family. Their names were Joe Stasio and Frank Saponaro. And they did not like,
they're just such generic names. Sorry.
they did not like the competition that Chet and his drug dealing was providing, or was, operating against them. And just to go back to the names so that you would laugh a little bit more, Joe Stasio was called Joe Beef, and Frank Saponaro was called Frankie Sap. So it's and I'm not making any of this up.
I know you're not. That's why I'm laughing.
And if I ever did a movie on this. Yeah. So anyway, Frankie Sap and Joe Beef had many conversations with Checkett. They said, basically, stop selling on our territory. Otherwise, something's going to happen, and he basically felt these guys will never do anything to me, because now, of course, I'm kind of assuming that that's what he would say, but I did learn from certain people that after we got into the case, who knew him and them, that his attitude was, basically, fuck them. They're not going to do anything to me, because how are they going to touch, the fair-haired boy of Bay Ridge? They'll be knocked down themselves by all the people who live here. Well, little did he know that they didn't give a damn about, all-American boy Chet Checkett.
Yeah.
And here's what their plan was. It was very simple, and he kind of played into their plan. He had a car that he was looking to sell, and he had advertised it in all the local Bay Ridge newspapers. And believe it or not, Tommy, there are several of them in Bay Ridge, local papers, and they cover not only Bay Ridge, but the neighboring community of Bensonhurst and Diker Heights. All of these neighborhoods are kind of contiguous with one another out in that section of Brooklyn. And he advertised this car, was not having much luck selling it, until one day he gets a call from someone who says, I want to look at your car. I'm really interested. I'm looking to buy it. So Checkett sets up a meeting with them. He says, my car is parked with the buyer. My car is parked in a particular area of Bay Ridge. Now, this particular area was even more suburban-like than the rest of the area. It was a residential street, lots of trees, some street lights, but not as many. It could be, a street in the middle of Iowa somewhere, right? Quiet,
sure,
street with lots of trees and few street lights. So the meeting was set for, I forgot what time it was. It was probably around 10 o'clock. And Checkett drives his car there, and he gets out and he waits. And the reason I know what happened next is because there were witnesses on the street who heard and saw some things. They originally saw the car that was parked there, and they didn't have any idea what was going on. But then they heard several gunshots. And one particular guy who happened to be on the street, after the gunshots, he had looked over at the car and he noticed that the passenger side door of the car was open, and he noticed the body on the ground near the passenger side door. And he also noticed that there was a guy walking away from the street onto the sidewalk and coming towards him. They passed each other on the street, and the witness, I'll call him the witness, went over to the car and realized now that there's a dead body there. And that started the investigation. Cops came, and it turns out that basically Checkett, looking to sell his car, provided a perfect opportunity for his murderers to do this in an area where there weren't going to be many witnesses. And except for that particular guy, there were going to be no witnesses. Now, he plays a big role in ultimately bringing these guys to justice, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. So the police now start their investigation. They do find, I'm sorry, the guy who was the quote unquote witness, he sticks around. So when the detectives get there, he tells them what he saw. And they say, okay, did you get a good look at the guy? And he said, I did. He passed right by me. I looked him right in the face, and and he went on his way. I think he got into a car and took off. I don't remember exactly what happened. So the cop said, okay, come back we're going to bring you back to the police station, and we're going to call the police artist, and you're going to make a sketch of the person you saw. First, they asked him, do you know the guy? He said, no, I don't know. I don't know who he is. So he goes back to the police station, and they do a sketch. And I have to tell you, I'll skip ahead, but I have to tell you that when the subject of that sketch was actually arrested, the sketch was almost as good as a photograph. It was uncanny. It was unbelievable.
I'm going to make a note of that right now on my phone. I was going to ask you, but I didn't want to interrupt. If you could put me in touch with like a sketch person, because I've seen those before and they're kind of crazy.
How close? Yeah, I will. I'll ask some of my
friends
if they can do that. Yeah,
make absolutely. A note right. Make a note right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So now the cops at least have a sketch, but the sketch takes them nowhere. They interview other people. They interview people who know Checkett. And of course, keep in mind, nobody in his circle of family or friends had any clue that he was dealing drugs. No one. So they weren't looking in those circles. They concluded, and this is what they looked for the next several years in trying to solve this case, someone who had attempted to rob Checkett, and it was unsuccessful. That's what they were looking for, a thief, because they had no idea that he was a drug dealer. So years go by. And as I said before, David Dinkins becomes the mayor of the city of New York. He succeeds Ed Koch. And one of the things that he does is appoint Ray Kelly, who was a police captain. He was a Marine. He's a guy who was a terrific police and law enforcement official. And he makes him police commissioner. And they go to the Bay Ridge precinct. And they have this meeting, and Mrs. Checkett, who had been in contact with the detective who had been originally assigned, was unhappy, to say the least, at the lack of progress in the investigation. She would call the other detective, if not daily, weekly. She'd go to the precinct to speak to him. She just made if you want to call it this, made a pest of herself. She just kept on their backs and didn't make a difference because it wasn't going anywhere. Yeah. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So and I'd have to tell you also that she and her husband had broken up. They were divorced. Chet had a sister. So that was basically the family. But she went to the meeting with a friend of hers, sat in the first row. And after the mayor and the new police commissioner did their little spiel, they asked for questions, and Mrs. Checkett raised their hand and went on to tell Ray Kelly and David Dinkins all about her wonderful son, the all-American boy, the football hero, the stockbroker, the guy that everybody in Bay Ridge loved. He was, he did charity work, he did everything, and how he was murdered by a thief who tried to steal his car while he was trying to sell it. And she said that the detectives have gotten nowhere, and she was angry, she was frustrated, she said all the necessary things to get Ray Kelly to commit to having the commander of the precinct reopen the case, and he committed to having the commander pick the two best detectives assigned to the detective squad of that precinct. Certainly not anybody who had worked on the case before, two new people to now work on this case. One of the detectives was a terrific friend of mine. And I had gotten to know him very, very kind of tangentially on another case, but he knew of me more than I knew him when he first came to me. And I was chief of the homicide bureau. So he walks in. Tommy Dades is his name. He walks in one afternoon with his partner, Mike Galetta. So those are the two detectives. And Dades is Greek, but he could have gotten off the wise guy boat from Little Italy, that. And Galetta was just a great, kind of, he was the calming influence of the
Sure.
two. Anyway, Tommy Days explains what happened and what he needs. And I say, look, okay, understand. And he said, I'll be back. I said, okay. Because they had nothing. They just had two new detectives working on the case. So I said, listen, you have nothing. So there's really no reason for you to be here. So anyway, the investigation continues. They get nowhere, Tom, nowhere, until one day, a low-life drug dealer from Bay Ridge gets picked up by the uniformed cops in the same precinct where Checkett was killed. And his name was Marco Ingraio. And he made an impression on me later on when I found out that across his back, he had stenciled the name or the word Bensonhurst for the neighborhood that he came from. And Bensonhurst was a notorious place. The neighborhood where in the Friends of the Family, where they pick up where the cops pick up the guy that they kill, this guy Jimmy Heidel, who tells them all about how Gas Pipe Castle gets shot at. Anyway, so
I don't know if it's because
Benson-
I don't know if it's because I've barely slept in the last two
Bensonhurst
nights.
is-
Sorry, you just broke up. Mike, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. I don't know if it's because I've barely slept in the last two nights. I know we've gone over Gas Pipe and everything, but it's just all the fucking names. It's just hitting me. How art really does imitate life. Sorry, keep going. Gas Pipe.
Oh yeah, it does. It does. Anyway, so imagine a guy having Bensonhurst tattooed across his back. That was Marco.
Sure.
So he was a big mouth. He was a guy who thought that, I don't know if you ever heard the expression that this guy thought that his shit didn't stink. Well, that was the guy, and when the cops brought him into the precinct, they brought him up to the squad room where the cell was, the detention cell. And he was mouthing off at the cops, this is not going to stick. That stuff that I was selling, I had prescriptions for. And he was just a big loudmouth. Nobody paid attention to him until he says to the detectives now in that room, "What's up with you guys? You haven't locked up Joe Beef yet?" And he points to the sketch, which they had hanging in the squad room for years, in the same place, Tom, in the same location for years. And Marco says to them, "What's wrong with you guys? How come you haven't locked up Joe Beef yet?"
Yeah.
Well, that gets someone's attention. They call in Tommy and Mike Galetta, and he gives them a statement, and he tells them that he knew Saponaro and he knew Joe Beef or Stasio. He knew that they were the ones who were responsible for Checkett's death, because he'd been involved with them when they were planning this thing and talked about it afterwards. He wasn't an actual eyewitness. Now, just one thing I skipped over, I want to go back to. When Tommy and Mike Galetta had gotten the case, they had the sketch, of course. So they went to the guy that was the guy who helped draw he didn't draw it, but he gave the information, the witness. He gave the information to the sketch artist. He owned this particular individual owned a store in Bay Ridge. And when Tommy and Mike came in to talk to him about the sketch, he was very, very reluctant to talk about it. Very reluctant. They finally got out of him that the reason for his reluctance was that a day or so after the murder and after he had done the sketch, some stranger, he called them, walked into his store. Now, I forgot what kind of store it was. Looked around. He had never seen the guy before. But as soon as he got a good look at him, he realized that that was the guy that he saw walking away from the murder scene. It was Joe Beef. And he said, listen, guys, he stood here in his store and after he pretended to look around, he just stared at me and stared, and then he walked out. Exactly. He said, I knew who it was. I wasn't going to come back into the PD, back into you guys and tell you anything. He said, that's why I haven't said anything more. Okay. So now Ingraio, Marco, gives them what he knows, and they now have the ability to, they have enough, they believe, to make an arrest. Okay. But in Brooklyn, the rule was that you couldn't make an arrest in a murder case unless the district attorney gave permission, because the DA has to try the case. And that was a rule that had been there before I got to the office and was still in place. And Tommy knew it. Tommy Dades knew it. He came to me, he had touched base, I told you, way before, came back, and he said, Mike, here's what I got. And he tells me about Marco. He says, you got to, can you go to the grand jury with what we have? I said, Tommy, I can't convict him with this guy, particularly since he's a skell, but I'll go to the grand jury and we'll present the case, probably be able to get it a murder indictment. But you guys have to promise me that you'll not stop looking at the case and investigating just because if we get an indictment, just because we get the indictment. They were happy as hell. They keep in mind, the police commissioner gave them this job. It had taken them months to get to this point. Now they have somebody, me, who is willing to go out on a limb and indict this case so that we could get try to get a conviction, right? I afterwards, Tommy told me that the reason they came to me is because I had obviously developed a reputation that I was not the kind of guy who was afraid of going out on a limb and doing things. And I wasn't, and I did. And after that, I can't tell you how many of these cold cases Tommy Dades and I did and solved. So I indicted Saponaro and Stasio. And I believe at the time, Stasio was, I think he might have been, I can't remember if he was in jail or, well, anyway, when they pick him up, he's in the back of the squad car. And I don't think he was in jail, now that I think about it. And they tell him what he's being arrested for and keeps his mouth shut. But then he says something which I use later on at the trial. He says, how much time do you think I can get for this? Now, that's not a confession, but it's coupled with all of the rest of this stuff.
I mean,
it was great.
That's close. That's close enough. Mom and Dad, if I did do this, how long would I be grounded for?
Exactly. That's what he said. So now I'm getting ready for the case, and Tommy and Mike Galletta are out there now that they have Marco. They now know what underworld area they need to concentrate on to find other people. They first come to me with a stockbroker who was friends with Checkett. He knew the whole story of Checkett's background. I would tell you his name, but quite frankly, Tom, it escapes me. I just can't remember, but I can describe him. He looked like the prototypical stockbroker. He lived in Bay Ridge, but he was a tall, handsome guy, blondish hair, and he thought he was another guy who thought that, his shit didn't stink.
Yeah. Originally
he comes in and basically tells me to go fuck myself. He's not doing anything. He says, you don't know, I'm not giving you anything. And I said to him, the one thing that I can't do to you is I can't lock you up for not helping me. There's no such, you're not obligated.
Yeah.
But what I can do, and I want you to keep this in the back of your mind, I can let the SEC know that you're hanging around on the streets with mobsters, people who are doing drugs, and I'm not sure that your stockbroker's license will stay intact once I tell him that. And I promise you that I will. So he goes, fuck you, fuck you. He leaves my office with his lawyer. I said to myself, in like 5 minutes, he's going to be back, because I could tell that this had really touched the chord. Well, I was off by a minute or two. His lawyer and he marched back into my office. Okay, we'll tell you what we know. And he does. And he tells us about Check It. That's how we really confirmed that Check It was a drug dealer. Marco had told us it, but it came from Marco. This guy told us about Check It selling drugs on Wall Street, selling drugs in Bay Ridge. He had a lot of information. But Tommy, I got to tell you, he was the biggest pain in the ass that I have ever encountered as a prosecutor, as a witness. This guy, every time he told us something, it was something that we had to pull teeth. Until one night, he comes into the office. He's again having second, third, fourth thoughts about doing this. Quite frankly, he knew what Check It was doing, and he knew the mob guys were going to, were going to be a problem for him if he told them what he knew. He was afraid. He didn't want to die, and he felt that the mob guys were going to kill him. But he was dealing with me, and I said to myself, screw you. I'm going to go to the SEC if you don't help me. He so finally came in one night and he said, everything I told you is all bullshit. None of it's true. None of what I told you is true. And, but I'm going to be on the street alone. And we tried to talk him out of it. Tommy, myself, I had a colleague of mine working on the case with me. And all he was doing was basically whining how much he was putting us on the line, on and on and on, until finally it got to the point where I thought Tommy, the detective, was going to hit him with a chair. It was just such a pain in the ass. We finally said, I said to him, get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. Certainly I can't use you, but keep in mind, I'm going to the SEC.
Yeah.
So that was a good witness, except for the fact that he wouldn't testify, but he gave us a lot of intelligence, a lot of places where Tommy could look for other people, right? So he finds another guy, a guy named Mikey Gattuso.
Jesus Christ.
And when Mikey Gattuso comes in, and the reason that he was involved is because he had heard about Stasio and Saponaro getting locked up. He was in jail at the same time and was looking to help himself out. And he knew that Saponaro and Stasio were drug dealers, and he was ready to talk, right? So they bring in Mikey the Killer Gattuso. That's what he tells me his name is. So I look at him, and he comes in from jail. He's got a cane. The first thing I say to him is, why do they call you the killer? He said, because when I was a kid, I used to kill cats. I said, that's why they call you the killer? You used to kill cats? He goes, yeah. I said, well, why the hell do you have that cane? And I'm going to use a word that I have to use because he said it to me.
Quoting the story.
He said, I got the cane. I pretended I hurt my knee. So I have the cane so I could beat off all the niggers in jail.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
This was a guy who was out of central casting. I mean, he was out of central casting. But he had a lot of good information, and he agreed to testify. So now I had Marco, who agreed to testify. I had Mikey the Killer, and we had this other guy who's I only remember his first name being Jimmy. And he was one of the runners for Gattuso and Saponaro. They would come up with the drugs, someone who would buy it from them. He'd transport the purchase over to the buyer and bring back the money. And he knew that Check It was cutting into their business. So, and he was there when they were planning the killing. So he became an important witness. I can't even begin to describe how unbelievably ugly this guy was. He was tall. Must have been like 6'2". He must have weighed about 100 pounds. He had this ugly blondish hair. He was disheveled, but he was a guy who actually told us a lot more than I expected. So I'll skip ahead a little bit. I prep him and I tell him when the trial starts, I want you to come dressed, not like that, but as if you were going to church. He goes, okay, Mr. V, I understand. I'll be here. Don't worry. So now we got everybody lined up, ready to start the case. So what do I have to do next? And that is, I have to sit down with the Checkett family because the whole motive for this murder is that he was a drug dealer. He may have been a good guy in all the other ways, but he was a drug dealer. So I got to know the family very well. And I started with his father. I figured, man to man, I could talk to him. And I was surprised by something he said to me. When I told him what my plan was and how I was going to approach the case, he said, I knew there was something off with Chet. He says, I knew it. I had heard that it might be drugs from people in the neighborhood, but I knew there was something wrong. So I have no problem. If that's what you have to do to convict these people, then, go ahead and do it. And what I was going to do is to argue that he was killed because he had infiltrated, so to speak, this drug operation of these two wise guys, and they killed him to eliminate competition. So the next person I had to speak to was Mrs. Checkett, and I knew this was going to be a bit of a problem. She constantly called me during the trial, during the preparation, during the investigation. She was there when after the arrest, when they were arraigned in criminal court. Then after the indictment, she was in court when they were arraigned in Supreme Court. And I have to tell you, I sat her down and I had his sister with her, I had Chet's sister with our mother. And I broke the news to them. And she originally said to me, her first words were, "That's not true. My Chet was not a drug dealer." And she wanted to tell me again about how wonderful he was and all of this stuff. And I said, "Mrs. Checkett, I have more information than I need, more evidence than I need. And if I can't do this way, there's no motive for the crime. This at least gives me an opportunity to convict these guys." So she says, "My son was not a drug dealer, but if you have to say that, then you can go ahead and say it." I said, "I have to say it because it's the truth."
Yeah.
I mean, dealing with a mother at this point, Tom, she was suggesting that I was going to lie and make this up. I was not making it up.
Yeah.
So
you can't even passively agree, like, okay, I'll just say it. Like, you're like, no, it is what it is. Even if you agree with her, it's like, if there's a hot mic somewhere, this whole thing's thrown out.
Yep. His sister, Chet's sister, told me that she understood as well. And she said basically that, I'll take care of Mom. So that was the toughest part of the case, quite frankly. I have to tell you, having to tell Mrs. Checkett that, this is what I had to do. Because, Tom, during the investigation and during the indictment and during all of that stuff, I never told her about the drug aspect. I wasn't going to blow my case, on talking to her about this. I never told the family about, what I intended to do. And I never told them that if I didn't do it this way, I wouldn't be able to win the case. We had to do it this way. So we did. We start the trial and we put Marco on the stand. And Marco was Marco. He was terrific. He really was, except for one thing that surprised us. We asked him, how well he knew Stasio and Saponaro. And he told us that he knew them very well. that he also was a guy who was running for them. He was selling for them, and he happened to be around when they told him that they wanted to kill Checkett because he was in the way. Then out of nowhere, without even a question being asked, he said, Frankie Sapp, I got to tell you something about him. And he used the pejorative term. He said, he's a faggot.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody in his crew knows that, but I know it. And you know how I know it? And now nobody's objecting, so we're letting it go. He said, he used to come over to my house or invite me over to his apartment, and he wanted to give me blowjobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I almost fell off the chair I was on. I said, who wants to do that when it seems like it's more like the other way around, where you want to force the guy who is your inferior to do it for you? No,
Sure.
It was the other way around. He put a gun to his head and he said to him, I want to give you, I want to give you oral sex. And Marco said on the stand, if I didn't let him do it, he was going to shoot me, kill me. That was that you should have seen the reaction of the jury. Tom. They were
that's
unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, kind of tarnishing the whole all-American look.
Yeah, well, it was Saponaro was obviously a closeted gay man.
Sure.
Because in a mob, you have to be closeted, otherwise you're going to be in the coffin.
Yeah, you got to be alpha. You got to be male. You got to
Right. So, but it wasn't enough. He kind of reversed what I would think would be the traditional roles when somebody is going to force another person to perform sex. It was the other way. It would be the other way.
It seemed like a power move. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's exactly what it was. So that was Marco, and he was terrific. He gave us everything he needed. He withstood cross-examination. Mikey Gattuso told us what he knew as well. And Gattuso was believable because he played the role. It wasn't even a role. When he was up on the stand telling them about his involvement in this drug operation, it was as if John Gotti was up there. Nobody had to sell them on the idea that this guy was a wise guy who was a criminal and would be involved with them. And he had great information. Now, the mistake, there was a very big mistake that was made during the course of the trial by the defense attorney. And that is, we couldn't get the person who was responsible for the sketch artist rendition. He wouldn't come in. He was still frightened by that visit to his store back, months or a year before. So we had no way of getting the sketch in. And Tommy, when I tell you that the sketch was almost a photograph of Stasio, I was really upset because we tried and tried. I had no other way of getting it in because he had to introduce the picture because it was his information that provided the sketch. And it wasn't good enough to call the sketch artist because the sketch artist could only say, I drew a sketch of what this guy was telling me. I don't know who he is. Yeah. I had to get the guy in to say, he's the guy I saw coming from the car, right? But during Marco Ingraio's testimony, the defense attorney made a big mistake. He said, well, you didn't give any information until, and this is how stupid he was, until years after that sketch was drawn. So Marco says, sketch? I don't know anything about a sketch. All I know is there was a sketch in a precinct, and I pointed out to the cops that was Joe Beef. The defense attorney had now opened the door to me to allow me to put the sketch into evidence. If he hadn't asked that question, then it never would have come into evidence. When I moved it into evidence, the defense attorney went nuts. Yeah. And here's the judge. The judge on the stand said, very simple, Mr. I forgot his last name, Mr. So-and-so, you opened the door. Why did you ask him a question about the sketch if you didn't want it in evidence? So now we had the sketch, right? We had Gattuso, we had Ingraio, and now was Jimmy. So I'm sitting in my office. It's about 9 a.m. They bring him in. Now, remember what I told him. Dress the way you dress, go to church. He walks into my office and I almost fell off my desk chair. He had on a lime green suit with the jacket was like a waiter's jacket, come to his waist. The pants were skinny before skinny jeans and skinny pants were in. And more important, he had a white ruffled shirt.
That's exactly what I was imagining. So it's Dumb and Dumber mixed with My Cousin Vinny.
With a Western tie, and the piece de resistance, his ugly blonde hair was now basically glued straight up on his head.
Insanity plea.
It gets better. It gets better. We call him, we bring him over. And first of all, I said to him, Jimmy, what the hell? I told you to dress the way you go to church. He goes, Mr. V, this is how I go to church. This is how I dress when I go to church. I can't argue with you.
All right. So, I guess that's between him and the creator. Yeah.
We bring him over to the courtroom, put him on the stand. And my colleague was questioning him. And he asks the first question. Tell the jury what your full name. And he tells them. And while he does that, he has his hands down on his lap, and he grabs his crotch and shakes it as he answers the question. So I couldn't believe it. I said, nah, there must be something. He said, so then the next question, tell us, where you live. He gives her the answer, shakes again. So basically he's grabbing himself and shaking it as he's so 5 questions, 5 answers with him grabbing his crotch and shaking it as he's answering it to the jury. The jury is like, they're looking around at each other. I can't hold in the laughter. So I get my colleague's attention. I say, ask for a recess. We got it. So he asks for a recess. The judge grants it. We take him in the back. And I say to him, Jimmy, what the fuck are you doing? You're grabbing your dick every time you answer a question and you shake it. He goes, I do. I am. I said, yeah. What the hell are you doing?
I was going to say either a power move or it's an unconscious anxiety thing.
Exactly what it was. But you know what not knowing about that, I had the guy in my office half a dozen times prepping him. He never did it. It was nerves. Yeah. It was also nerves.
Sure.
So what I told him to do, I said, listen, here's what you do. Just sit on your hands, put them under your thighs and sit on your hands so that you don't do this. You're distracting the jury. You look like a fool. And you're an important witness to us. So he does it. Thank God we got through the entire, entire testimony. It was terrific. So I forgot to say one other thing. Because of Stasio's statement, how much time can I get for this, which we put into evidence, which we wanted to put into evidence. Because he said it can't come into evidence against the other defendant, because that defendant would not have an opportunity to cross-examine him because he doesn't have to take the stand. So the solution was 2 juries. So the entire case was tried with 2 juries in the courtroom. When it came time at the end for me to put in the Stasio statement about how much time could I get, the other jury had to leave the courtroom. Then we put the detective on the stand. He told us what he said. And then we brought them back for the remainder of the trial. And so I was the only guy summing up because my colleague who had tried the case with me had something he had to do in DC that day. And he was a junior guy anyway. And I said, don't worry about it. So what did that leave for me? I had to compose and deliver 2 entire different summations to 2 juries on the same day. So we did one, took a break for an hour, came back and did the other. And we were fortunate. We were able to get, a conviction in both cases. It didn't take the juries very long to do it. And I'll end by telling you what happened in the hallway outside the courthouse, outside the courtroom. When I get outside, all the family is congratulating me. And Mrs. Checkett comes up and gives me this big hug, and then whispers in my ear, my son was not a drug dealer. To the end, Tom, to the end.
I
Couldn't,
the
and I had it, and I let me just interrupt 1 second.
yeah, sure.
Before I summed up, I had her again in my office and I said, listen, you may not want to come to the summations because this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to argue that your son was a bad guy. You understand that? She said, my son was not a bad guy, but if you have to do that, then I'll be there. And she sat through the entire thing. And, but she held on to the end with that whisper in my ear. I don't know what else to say, but I have to tell you that when I got this case, when Tommy first came in and I took it over and I took the case with him, I didn't know anything about, I'm not from Bay Ridge, so I didn't know anything about this. But the guys in my office, the people who worked for me and the detectives who worked as investigators for the DA's office, they all knew about the Checkett case because it was one of these mysteries that had sat around Bay Ridge. And I'm sure that there was all kinds of talk all over the years about why Chet Checkett was killed and who killed him and the mystery of the selling of the car and the sketch and all this other stuff. Excuse me. They all knew it. They said, oh man, you're going to do this? I said, yeah, I think we have it. So when it was over, my boss, who lived in Bay Ridge and who knew exactly what was going on, he knew about this for years that it had not been solved. It made a hero out of him because he now could go home to his, to the political clubs and the people out there. And Mrs. Checkett was a very powerful force out there. Believe me, she had that, that gift of gab, and she was very active in the community. So it was a good way to, I hadn't been chief of the homicide bureau very long either when I got the case. So it was good for me, and it was good for the DA. Tommy Dades and I went on from there to solve several other cases, these cold cases. And in one case, I'll just give you, I know we're getting close to the
no, you're fine. You're fine.
But in one of the cases, we actually we had heard that the killer had thrown the gun into a body of water in Brooklyn called Coney Island Creek. And it was literally in Coney Island. But Tom, if you ever saw Coney Island Creek, you'd say, what am I doing here without a gas mask, without a hazmat suit? It was as polluted a waterway as you could possibly imagine. And this is years later. And you know what? We sent the divers in, and guess what? They found the gun.
Got it.
They found the gun. So Dades and I have had a very interesting career together. We've done a lot of stuff. And quite frankly, I spoke to him the other day. We're still trying to sell Friends of the Family to TV or to the movies, because he was involved with me in that case as well. With the Eppolito and
Caracappa.
Yeah. So he said, Mike, you're doing writing now. He said, what would be a great book? Our story, you and me and what we did and all the adventures we had and stuff. And it's true. So I may very well think about that. After I finish, by the way, I got to tell you, I'm halfway through the new book about the devil coming to Brooklyn So, and I have a deal. I got since I last spoke to you. I've got a publisher interested. Yeah.
All right, because you were unsure about that last time.
I wasn't, but I have one.
Told
now,
you.
And
told you, lean into it. Man.
And the publisher wants to make it a 3-book deal. So we'll see. So anyway, that's the story of Chester Checkett and his mom and Stasio Saponaro and the witnesses, the likes of which you've never encountered. It's unbelievable. Gattuso, Mikey the Killer, became really a big informant for my office later on for the rackets division before I became involved with rackets. And what he was doing was he was being kept in a safe house because he was a witness for a rackets case. and until they had to throw him out. You know why? He was selling untaxed cigarettes out of the DA's office state safe house to wise guys. This
Idiot.
is the kind of people that, you know, were that we had to deal with when we were doing these cases. So
What I
unbelievable.
what I want to say about the mother's line though, it's, you know, when she's saying if you have to say that and you're going, it's not that if I have to, you're kind of, you know, you're kind of talking, you know, you're say, you're not saying what needs to be said. You're kind of saying like, yeah, look, I fucking know, like whatever, I'll go along with it too. But what you're outwardly saying is no, he was a drug dealer. I have to because it's a, you know, it's an airtight case.
Exactly
But I
right.
would imagine in your mind, you're probably saying, yeah, you know, if in a perfect world, you would pause time and look at her just to comfort the mom and say, okay, fine. Yeah, he wasn't a drug dealer, but I have to say this. But you can't say that out loud. To me, it's almost the same thing. Is she is saying in her mind, she probably knows, but to her, it's almost like it's an airtight case with her deceased son, like a mother's love. It
Yeah,
got that love got, it's like, that's a weird analogy. It's like that's what made this all happen was her never giving up in that persistence,
exactly.
which is driven by
Exactly.
love. I can imagine in her mind, it's I'm not going to give up on the 1 yard line now. We just did it all. I'm not about to say, and my son's a drug dealer. She probably knows deep in there. She can't bring herself to say,
I agree with you. I agree with you. There was too much evidence. I mean, if you heard my
yeah, yeah,
summation,
yeah. No, she doesn't sound like a
put it
stupid woman.
together.
It's,
Yeah,
listen,
and she listened to all the witnesses. She heard them all. You know.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
yeah. If that was me, if I was Chet, yeah, my dad would probably be like, yeah, yeah, no, I got it, and my mom would probably deep down know, but no, she would never say it, and it's just, I think that's just that love is what got the case eventually solved.
exactly. You know
It's not
what?
going to stop now. Yeah.
Why I believe that this is it was one of the most important things I ever did when I was there, is because of Mrs. Checkett,
Yeah.
because that she never ever gave up
Yeah.
trying to get the authorities
Yeah.
to look at the case. And look what happened, Tom.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
did,
They got it.
and that was it. And she was able to you know, to get some closure and get peace. And to her, she could, you know, I don't know, I don't even know if she's still around, but I'm sure if she isn't, she went to her grave thinking that in her heart of hearts, she might have kind of come to grips with it, but I don't think she did. I think that
Maybe not, but maybe not.
I,
But it's that might almost be like an acceptable margin of error. If that love is
yeah,
what
yeah,
solved
yeah,
the cold case, fuck it. Who cares?
it was. And
Like,
let me tell you something, Tom, this,
sure.
when I talk about cold case, this was ice cold. I mean,
Yeah.
this was the detective who had it back when the murder occurred was not even around anymore. The
Yeah.
detectives were all gone. So this was two detectives, Tommy and Mike Galetta, who knew nothing about the case and started from scratch and made it. You know, we made
Yeah.
it. And,
So, to
and they promised me that they would continue working, and they did. And they came up with, you know, three other witnesses, and that's what did it for us. You know, and I argued, one of the things they did argue in summation is that every one of the witnesses was bad, as I have described for you, in terms of the street. They were the street. They were on the street. They were all had problems. I said to them, but you know what they are? They are the perfect witnesses to tell you about two wise guy drug dealers, because not because they're looking at it from afar, but because they're right there. They're
yeah.
into it. They know it. These are the best recorders of this history, and telling you because they lived it and are living it is the way that why you should believe them. And it worked, you know, it
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah.
So
It's the cold case and the
yeah,
mother's warm, loving heart. Cold case, warm heart. But that's what it is. So I mean, you
exactly,
know,
exactly.
I don't blame. I mean, fuck, who
And
cares?
and you can't discount the sketch, the mistake that the
Yeah.
defense attorney made. When I tell you photograph, it was as close to a photograph as you could possibly get. It was great. But think
Totally.
about this. And I always think about, I thought about it when we decided that we were going to talk about this. I thought back to what it must have been like that day when when Marco was in that cell and he was looking around the room. He was giving the cops a hard time. And then he figures I'll give them a hard time about Joe Beef. The sketch was there for years on that bulletin board. No one probably gave it a second thought or a third thought or a fourth thought.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that happening? It was, to me, it was almost like, it was destined to be done because, and Mrs. Checkett, I think, had a lot to do with that.
I was gonna say Miss Checkett was, she was the lock pick. She was the lock pick, and there were all these pins inside of the lock. There were all these witnesses, sketches, and she just kept pushing the lock pick over the years, and it kept hitting the pins one by one, and it finally unlocks the door. And then someone tells her, "Hey, that door wasn't locked." Of course, she's gonna say, "Fuck you, it was locked," right? It's
exactly. Very good analogy. That's very good.
Take the win, right? Who cares? Who cares?
Exactly.
Take the win.
It was a great case. It was a great case. I've never put it down on paper in terms of writing it as a short story, which I will do at some point. But I really am happy that I was involved because it gave me satisfaction too. It was the kind of thing that became sort of a quest for a bunch of people, and for different reasons. Mrs. Checkett, and then the two detectives who were trying to not make their bones, but show the new police commissioner that they could do it, and then the DA who reaped the benefit of it because it was his neighborhood and he could go home and feel proud about what his office did. So it was a good thing. So, but thank you for letting me tell the story. It was
no, you're fine. You're fine.
But
yeah, I gotta run real quick. I gotta do the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing because I don't know how to stop. But Mike Vecchione, all the books in the description, links to everything, all the good stuff. Obviously, as always, I'll text you. We'll set up the next episode, and I will also text you about the sketch guy. I would love to have on a criminal sketch suspect. You know what I'm saying? And
yes, sketch artist.
I'm losing my mind. I need to sleep tonight. Mike Vecchione, thank you so much, sir. Much love, brother. Thank you for coming on. I'll send you a text when it's up. All right, man.
Have a good.
Thank you so much.